Hey guys, welcome to Social Studies class and back to our unit on World War I, the war to end all wars, or so they started to call it, especially as it really wore on through 1914, 15, and 16. The battles that we're going to talk about in this little series here are a lot of the reasons that people started to call it the war to end all wars, because it seemed like how could there be another war after this incredible conflict? So let's dig in and start with the Schlieffen Plan. The Schlieffen Plan, Mr. John, why do we care about a plan? The reason is because, as I kind of alluded to with the last video about the causes, is World War I didn't have to happen. There were opportunities to stop it. People and diplomats didn't want it to happen. I'll talk later about even more as we kind of dig in. But one of the reasons is that it did happen is that every country had a plan, and every country was obsessed with their plan. They'd all made their plans. If war breaks out, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to beat our enemies. And we have to make our plan work, not theirs. And so that meant that everybody, as war approached, needed to do what needed to be done to make their plan happen. And their plan wound up driving history instead of people. The people weren't brave enough or wise enough or whatever to say, stop the plans, let's talk. If they had, they almost definitely would have avoided this catastrophe. So the plan that is generally most important at the start of World War I is the German plan, the Schlieffen Plan, and that's why we're going to talk about that one. So let's get a little bit closer here. Basically, the Schlieffen Plan worked like this. It was a plan that a German strategist named Schlieffen, shocking, plan is named after him, devised to invade France in the event of war with Russia. But basically, it was to prevent a two-front war. So again, as the war starts, Austria gets mad at Serbia. They declare war on Serbia. Russia declares war on Austria. Germany, therefore, has to declare war on Russia. But what they do is they declare war on Russia, and then instead of attacking Russia, they leave 1/8 of their army on defense in East Prussia near the border with Russia and send 7/8 to invade France. They do this because they know, because of alliances, that as soon as they declare war on Russia, France will declare war on them. And the Schlieffen Plan was to send most of the German army to invade France in the hopes of, in 40 days, conquering France and knocking France out of the war, enabling them to fight a one-front war against the Russians. Had it worked, the war might have been short. Germany would have knocked France out. Maybe Britain would have never entered the war, and then they'd have turned around and they would have obliterated Russia. So it's not a completely flawed plan, because actually, if you look at this map, invading France from the north through Belgium, avoiding the French defensive lines, that is eerily similar to what Hitler's going to do in World War II. And in World War II, it works. And in, I think, exactly 40 days, France falls in World War II and surrenders. In World War I, it does not work. There's a number of reasons why, the first of which being it is logistically impossible. Schlieffen made an addendum to his plan in like 1905, because he made it like 20 years before the war, that said, yeah, actually I did the math, and you cannot move people that fast through that much territory through the roads that exist. It is logistically impossible for us to get into position in time for this to work and to make France collapse. So that big sweep that goes around and south of Paris is not going to be possible. The Germans simply cannot physically move that far, and Schlieffen knew it. So the Germans are going to activate a flawed plan, a plan whose the person who invented the plan said it can't work. Maybe not the best idea. There's another problem with this, and you'll notice, and that is because the Germans invade through Belgium. That is going to have some consequences. One, I already kind of alluded to this. The inevitability of war is a consequence of the Schlieffen Plan. Because they're so focused on the Schlieffen Plan, there's no, what if we avoid war? It's war is coming, we have to go to war, and we have to win. And so they put their plan into effect instead of trying to stop it. It makes the war happen, inevitable, the plan itself. But the second is Britain enters the war because of the Schlieffen Plan. If Germany had just attacked France in the border between Germany and France, which was fortified and therefore not ideal, it would have been harder to break through, although they might well have been able to do it. If they'd done that and fought the French army there where the French army thought they were going to fight them, Britain probably would not have entered the war. And we'll go to Squidward to explain why. When a Serb kills an Austrian in Bosnia, so you, an Englishman, must fight the Germans in France. I feel you, Squidward. I feel you. What happened is England had a treaty with France, but not an alliance. And that meant England was not bound to enter this war if France got attacked. It meant England wasn't going to attack France. They were, friendly at the time, but they weren't good, long-standing allies. England and France had been fighting for domination of Europe for the last 100 years since Napoleon. And in those times, they really were longtime rivals and enemies, England and France. So they're not natural allies. They're not true allies. They just have a treaty. And that means there's a really good chance that if the Germans hadn't done it the way they did, that the English would have sat the war out. They'd have been like, all right, old chap, have fun. We'll be over here drinking tea and having fun with our colonies. And they'd have just let Europe all kill each other. And then when the war was over, they'd have traded with everybody. And if they'd done that, England would have left the war probably, massively rich and powerful. I mean, as it is, they're going to win. So they are going to leave the war in pretty good shape. But hundreds of thousands, millions of English soldiers are going to die. That wouldn't have had to. War is expensive. War is deadly. This war is especially expensive and deadly. And so there's a lot of reasons that England would not have joined the war. That's important. England joining the war was not inevitable until Germany invaded Belgium. Because England had a 75-year-old treaty with Belgium, gathering dust somewhere in a back room. And when Germany invaded Belgium and Belgium opposed them, that treaty went into effect, and England was now bound by treaty to support Belgium and enter the war. So as soon as Germany invades Belgium, the British Expeditionary Force, this sort of rugged, professional army of England that had fought in colonial wars, lands in the shores and goes to the help of Belgium. And that really messes Germany up. Basically, a couple of things do. Number one, it's just not possible. The Schlieffen plan doesn't work mathematically over time, what the troops could do. But number two, the Germans are going to be delayed multiple days by two things. One is the arrival of the British Expeditionary Force, which they hadn't really anticipated. And this Expeditionary Force digs in and uses basically the first kind of defensive trench warfare to hold off the Germans who outnumber them heavily for a couple of days, and then actually they retreat because the French army's in retreat and they're going to get left behind. Their position doesn't get overrun. The French does. So they wind up having to retreat with the French to follow them. But that couple of days slows the German advance. It gives the French more time to prepare. In addition, the Germans also get more time to prepare because the Belgians, who the Germans think are just going to roll over and be like, whatever, come through our territory, no problem, we're Belgians. No, the Belgians stand strong. Their army is small but proud, and they oppose the Germans, and they get crushed. But they oppose them, slowing them down again a couple of days and forcing the Germans to leave troops besieging Antwerp and their fortresses and to bring up enormous cannons to break through these fortresses. And all of that makes it so that France has more time to mobilize, more time to secure its defenses, and prevents the Schlieffen plan from working. The Germans are unable to knock the French out of the war that quickly, though they do make some pretty significant advances. So this is important. Most of the war, down into trench warfare and is really depressing, and nobody moves anywhere, and everybody just stares at each other across the trenches and attacks and dies, and nobody gets anywhere. But 1914 is different. The initial German advance is almost as big as the Franco-Prussian War. They make it to 30 miles outside of Paris. They don't manage to sweep behind. They defeat the Belgians, and so Germany conquers Belgium. They're stopped at the Yser in the First Battle of Ypres by the British Expeditionary Force and French support. But then they push on down to where that dotted line is just outside of Paris. They get all that way in the initial couple of months of the war. That's an incredibly large advance, almost taking the French capital. The French will stop them at the First Battle of the Marne, which is kind of the Allied counterstrike, where the British Expeditionary Force and the French will surge back and push back. The Germans are overextended. They're too far from their supply lines. And the Germans very wisely, once their army gets kind of split, will pull back to that dark purple line, the front line of 1914 at the First Battle of the Aisne, the defensive positions. So let's look at that in a little more detail, because the First Battle of the Marne really saves France. That's what it is. It is the Allied counterattack. The British Expeditionary Force kind of finds a hole in the German line and jumps into the middle of it, and now they're threatening to flank the Germans. both the German armies or to divide them and conquer them one by one. The French are pushing forward on their lines, and the German high command says, they're saying this isn't going to work. We're stopped. So they pull back to the Ain River, where they command all of the high ground and where they dig these sophisticated trenches, and they wait for the Allied troops to come after them. And the British and the French come and just get massacred. They make no ground on the Ain once they're meet the German defensive. And that's where the trench lines are going to stabilize at the end of 1914. The Germans almost make it to Paris. They pull back a little bit defensively, and that essentially is where the trench lines are going to largely be for most of the war, and both sides will start digging in. Now, it's important to note that this year is different because this is the year where breakthroughs are possible, where there is a lot more chance of somebody winning and ending the war. The German belief that they had to conquer France in 40 days was actually pretty much true because they had to get it while the French were on their heels and mobile and before anybody dug in. So the battles of the Marne and the Ain, if you'll notice these pictures, are going to look a lot different than the battles that we're going to look at later in the war. Notice these French troops. They're not in a trench. They're behind a low hill, and they don't have metal helmets. They're there with their guns out, but this is a much more exposed position than the trenches that I talked about in the last mission. And here are the German troops. Again, they're in a very shallow trench, probably an irrigation tunnel. Not sophisticated. They do have metal helmets there with their pointy metal helmets. You can tell they're the Germans. And then here again, more troops fighting these battles. They're just lying on the ground for defensive covers. They have no trench. They have no wall. They have nothing to kind of support them that way. And that's something that's going to change. So when I talk later in our next couple of videos about Verdun and about the Somme, and you see images of those battles, those are the image we think of in World War I. The Battle of the Marne, in particular, and the German advance into the Schlieffen plan, this was the best chance anybody had to make advances. At this point, the war made sense. Everybody was fighting. They were going. It was kind of that stupid line tactic. You can tell they don't have much to protect them here. They're all in a line. But it wasn't the insanity of attacking trenches that is going to occur at Verdun and the Somme and later offensives. The war hadn't blocked into a stalemate yet, and that's visible in the pictures. Nobody had had a chance to really dig in. But after the Marne and after the Ain, the major battles of 1914, as winter sets in and the army stop working, both sides are going to dig those trenches, and we're going to see a more depressingly sophisticated form of World War I take effect.